Welcome to the Flowering Daydream podcast, where daydreams become reality. I'm Charlene Windus. I'm a healing arts practitioner and a ceremonialist. And this is my very first episode on the podcast in the podcast realm. This introduction episode, I'm really excited to share with you how this came about and why I'm here. I've really had the opportunity to listen to a lot of other podcasts, and I've had so much learning and insight and healing and just a lot of growth and expansion from being able to access these podcasts that people put out that are in alignment with, my spiritual development or growth or whatever it is that I'm seeking in that podcast realm. And so I'm just so thankful for people that spend their time and energy to give back in this way, because it is free to listen. And so it's just such a great, I think, resource. And I felt this incredible urge to come on here and to do a series. And I had this urge come through a divine download. And so I want to talk to you guys today about divine downloads, because I think they're absolutely phenomenal and incredible. And it can just really change your life when you begin to open up to receiving these divine downloads, but also taking action and inviting the downloads and really kind of just calibrating and adjusting your energetic system to receive this information. It's energetic information. So what is a divine download? It's just something that I call, it's a title or a name that I use to differentiate between my own thoughts. So I know when my own ideas come up or my own opinions come up, and then when I have a divine download, I know that it's not my own thought or my own opinion. It's something separate or outside of me, but it's coming into me from an outside source. And so when you think about, just the simple things like when the wind kind of brushes across your face, you can feel this energy in the wind, or when the rain comes down, you can feel the energy cleansing the air. You can smell the difference in the air, and you can just feel the shift in the air. And so that's what I mean by divine download, is it's this universal divine energy that's coming in through the clairsenses and through your psychic senses or your intuition. And so if we're able to sort of adjust the radio dial on our own energetic framework, we can really begin to open up to these divine downloads. And so I have some ideas around that from my own personal experience, but I think it's going to be unique and personalized for each individual, what that spiritual exploration journey looks like, where your foundations are and your own personal experiences are, and how those contribute to the development of how you receive that information. So I'll talk a little bit more about that after I tell you the story about how this came about, which is it's just so cool. And I'm so excited about it. So about a week and a half ago, I had a divine download. I had this incredible urge come into my body and my mind that I should do a podcast. And my intellectual and analytical mind was like, I don't know where that's coming from. I don't have time to do that. What would be the purpose of that? Lots of questions and kind of some hesitancy, but I've also trained myself to really be open to listening to things, even if the things that I'm getting are not something that I'm initially, super excited about. And so I asked, internally to my heart, what does that mean? And what would I do with a podcast? And I immediately started seeing some of the personal work that I've been diving deeper into, which would be the shadow work, the learning not to spiritually bypass, the learning to actually become friends with pain and grief and sorrow, and realize the duality that, these things that I might think are difficult can actually coexist with joy and harmony and peace and happiness at the same time and be together. It's not one or the other. And so that's some personal work that I've been deepening for quite some time now. And I feel like the download that I got was really creating a space to share in some of the shadow shadow work areas, but in a loving and unconditional way. And in a peaceful way and in a warm and loving way, so that they can be married together, these two energies, these polarity energies, in a good and beautiful way. And so after I got that download, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to do a podcast on, and the first thing that came up was death. And I was like, oh, I'm going to start with death. I was just kind of blown away. But again, I'm really opening to these downloads coming in and what this all means, and just like comfortability around death. So I'm going to actually do that in a different episode. I just want to talk about the downloads today, but there will be a death episode coming up. And so I was like, okay, so I got out my notebook and I started writing down all of the sort of divine downloads that were coming in about episodes and just content and ideas and things to share that need to be talked about. I need to have a space a loving space to be able to talk about those things. And so I kind of sat on that for a few days, and then I asked my friend who has her own podcast. I asked her some questions about setting up the podcast, just the back end things. And she explained that it wasn't too challenging and that she would help guide me through it if I needed help. And so I started kind of looking at that. And then last night, literally last night, okay, you guys, I did this all between last night and right now. And I'm recording this on, it's like 4:30 in the afternoon. And last night, these downloads continued up until midnight. And so here I am recording this because I need to get this out right now. I don't want to forget any of this for you all. And last night I had almost gotten home from work, and I was just thinking on my way home, and I thought, well, who would I have on the podcast? Would it just be me talking about shadow work and doing a shadow series, or would I have interviews? Would I have people on that are in that work that could share some insights as well? And I immediately saw the face of this wonderful man that I follow on TikTok. And he shares, so much healing information and insight, and I've just been really drawn to him. And what's funny is I don't usually connect with social media or anyone on social media. And I don't really make attachments in that way. So it was kind of interesting that for a while I've been kind of repeatedly going back to his page to watch and listen and learn and grow and heal with him. And so I saw his face and I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder if he would come on my podcast, and I thought, well, I don't know, probably not. I don't even know how I would get a hold of him. And, my mind kind of started taking over again. So I just kind of released it. And then that night when I got home, I got ready for bed, and he always does these TikTok lives between like 10 and midnight. And so I clicked on there for a minute and I watched some of his live. And while I was on the live, it was like 20 minutes in, and there was a conversation happening around some shadow work stuff, some deep, deep stuff. And he looked, into his camera on his phone and was like, some white girl needs to start a podcast, and I'll come on and we'll role play. It was about racism is what he was talking about in that moment. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like incredible that, and maybe lots of other white women, I'm a white woman, maybe there were lots of other white women listening that were inspired by that and spoke through that divine, download to go start their podcast and invite him on. And I don't know if I'll ever have him on the show, if he'll come on the show, or if we'll even make contact, but I took that as an incredible divine download. I mean, that was like the day of, I had just thought about him a half an hour before I went on to that live, and was like, I wonder if he would be a guest if I started a podcast, and then he's looking in the camera saying, you need to do this. It's just like, okay, loud and clear. I hear it. So the divine download. So that's how the creation of this podcast came about and how I'm doing this episode right now. But that's just like an incredible example of when we're listening to those external sort of guiding lights that come in, and whether or not we give them any fuel, right? And so we can choose what we feel. And when these downloads come in, if we actually take action and begin to pursue whatever the download is, as ludicrous, extreme, or unreal it seems, then these other downloads come and these other doors open, and it's just so fascinating to me. And so that is how I'm here right now with you all. And so I want to share another story just to give some more examples of these divine downloads. I think we get them all the time. Everybody does. We just don't really pay attention to them or act upon them, or open to the fact that we're receiving this energy on these very subtle levels. Sometimes we expect it to be really dramatic, or sort of a big thing that proves to you that something else exists, or something of that nature, when actually it's extremely subtle sometimes. At 20, gosh, I think I'm 41, forgetting how old I am now. 21 years ago, I was an atheist. Well, I don't know if I was an atheist. I just didn't really believe. I didn't know what I believed, and I didn't really have a belief system, but I could feel, I'd always felt a presence. I'd always felt guiding. I'd always had an internal compass. I always had really heightened intuition. So I knew something was internal. There was an internal system of some sort, but I didn't know what. And I remember I was working with this other woman, and she was a Christian, and she asked me if I had ever, asked for a sign from God. And I thought to myself, no, I really haven't, and I'm not really interested in religion, but that's an interesting concept, because God seemed like a bigger thing to me than that smaller version of what I felt that meant. And that was my own personal, opinion or whatever, and perception and experience. But I went home that night, and I genuinely said, on my hands and knees, and I was like, hey, if there's a God out there, can you show me a sign? Can you show me that exists, something really strong? And I really felt it in my heart. I really was like, I'm being very serious about this. I'm not looking for proof necessarily. I'm looking for communication. I'm looking to open up the rapport building, or the energy lines. And I drove to work the next day, and I drove past this church every day, and they always had scripture on the board for you to read. There was nothing ever outside of scripture. And that next morning, it read, need a sign from God? Here's one. I was like, holy shit. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I remember just being like so dumbfounded. I was just like, I can't believe this. So I went to work, and I told her, and I was very excited. And she's like, I told you Jesus exists, or, how much more coincidences do you need, or something like that. And I didn't say anything at the time, but internally I was thinking, well, I never interpreted that as Jesus or anything of a religious context. I felt like that was just spiritual energy speaking to me through the conduit of that church and the church's board. And then that began my spiritual exploration of everything that has happened in the last 21 years of my life. I've been in the healing arts industry for a very long time now, and I'm always in class or with a mentor, or with a teacher, or in therapy. I have a lot of healing to do, as do most of us. And it's been such an incredible journey for me that has progressed and evolved and turned into just a way of life, a way to connect, a way to work with ritual, and a way to access that healing inner compass and that intuitive center that we all have, and finding ways that connect to it that are meaningful for me and transformative. And so those types of divine downloads, they're happening all the time. And some of them aren't this dramatic or, sort of in your face. And some of them are a lot more subtle. But I'll tell you another story of a divine download. And I was in the car with my sister, and she was having a hard day, and she was really upset. And again, I'm not religious. I'm very spiritual, but I'm not religious at all. And we were in the car, and she just wasn't really consolable, and I didn't have anything else I could say to comfort her. And so I just asked in my heart, what can I say, or what kind of energy can I bring into the car right now that would be most helpful for her? Just to hold space, what kind of space can I hold? And as soon as I said that, I heard the word faith. And again, this is not in a religious context, even though it sounds like it. I didn't feel that way at all. I just heard tell her she has to have a little faith, a faith in life and faith in herself and faith in the earth, and so I looked at her and I said, you just have to have a little faith. I mean, this is not something I would ever say. And she, right as I said that, and I mean literally right as I said that, a car drove by on the freeway with huge stickers and words on the back that said faith. Like, what? And so these experiences just kept happening to me. I kept being open to them. I kept asking. I didn't even know who I was talking to. I just kept asking and opening and asking for the highest good and asking for direction and like, how can I be of service and how can I be a better person and how can I heal and how do I do this life thing, this journey of life? And these divine downloads just keep happening and kept happening. So I think that we're all getting them. We have our clear senses, we have clairaudience, and we have clairvoyance and inner vision, inner sight. We have, inner feeling, and we have emotions that can represent downloads and physical changes that can represent downloads. And so we're constantly really reading energy and feeling energy. And so I'm going to do an episode, of course, about protection at some point too, because I think energetic protection and boundaries is also a part of this. But I think if we set our intention to receive divine downloads and we continue to ask and we have an open heart and an open mind and something that we can spiritually anchor and connect to, or energetically anchor and connect to, that we can access our internal compass from, that we can sit with ourselves and find that divine creation energy within ourselves and how that extends outward, then we can really open to receiving these divine downloads. So another amazing example and story of divine downloading was the creation and name of the podcast, Flowering Daydream. And so once I was sitting down at my kitchen counter and I was really thinking about what name or phrase could encompass the space that I wanted to hold here and for the conversations that we were going to have. And I just thought about peaceful, harmonious, loving, accepting energy for whatever the conversations might bring up. So I ended up drawing some oracle cards and asking my heart and the divine for guidance. And all the cards were the same, and they were all this really beautiful opening and loving energy. But I still couldn't figure out like what exactly the name should be. And a lot of the names were taken already, that were pretty simple and encompassed kind of what I was thinking about. And so I just said in my heart again, I said, what should this name be? What is the highest good? So I'm always asking, almost like a confidant or, someone that I confide in, that I get my divine information from before I make a move on something intellectually or just because I want to do something. And so I'm always checking in, and I asked again, and I got this image of one of the candles in my shop, and the candle is a springtime candle, and the candle name is Flowering Daydream. And it was actually one of my friends that helped me come up with that name. And we had a long conversation about spring and blossoming and flowers and new beginnings. And this candle has roses from my garden. It's a beautiful candle. And so, it's about shedding the old and bringing in the new and just new beginnings and opening, a very opening energy. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to be the name of the podcast? Flowering Daydream? And as soon as I asked that question, I happened to look at the clock on my oven and it said 1111. And that's a symbolic number for me, between me and the divine. It always has been. And it's a number that symbolizes you're on the right track, you're going down the right path. And so it might mean different things in numerology or in terms of angelic meanings. But for me, that's the symbolic number that I'm on the right track. And I couldn't believe it. I was just like, man, this is just so many synchronicities and so many divine downloads and so many things lining up for this podcast. And then the subtitle, Daydreams Become a Reality. One of my amazing teachers taught quite a bit about daydreams and how important our daydreams are and how they can bring things from the invisible into the visible, along with your action and your intention. And so I just was like, okay, this is going to be the podcast name. This is really amazing how it all came together. So I hope you enjoyed that story about divine downloading and how the name of the podcast came about. Thank you so much for joining me in this first episode and listening to me share these stories about divine downloading. And I look forward to the mini talks that we're going to have on here. I'm going to head into my shadow series for a while and talk about the things that are on the tip of my heart here that really want to come to the surface, or at the depth of my heart, rather, that are wanting to come to the surface. And then after that, we'll see what happens and where it goes. Thank you for joining me on the Flowering Daydream podcast, where daydreams become a reality. You can find me at charlenewindus.com. You can also find me on Insight Timer, where I have free meditations. And you can find me on Patreon. Once a month, I do a community call with members. You can also find me on Udemy, where I have online intuitive development courses.